In 1915, Suffolk County, New York was the sort of place where reputation traveled faster than horse carts and lingered longer than the scent of cut hay. Fields sprawled out to the horizon. Blunt-edged houses leaned into dirt roads, and neighbors kept watch on each other's curtains like unpaid detectives. But one house made curtains stir more than most. Number 43 Galloway Road, a wide-gabled colonial with burned brown shutters, vines curling up its side as though they were trying to choke it, and a tilting porch that seemed to sag under the weight of secrets heavier than the wood it bore. Children crossed to the opposite side of the street when walking past it. Adults went quieter when passing the fence. Some whispered it was haunted. Others swore it wasn't the house at all, but the family inside. The Ballantines. The strange courtship. Town records confirm the marriage of William Ballantine to Agnes Gray on October 7, 1915. Nothing unusual in print. Those pages label William at age 26, Agnes at 19. Dates, licenses, a signature from Reverend Matthew Kirk. It all seemed ordinary. But paper doesn't capture faces. Paper can't gossip. Neighbors told a different tale. He looked 80 if he were a day, one account claimed, written decades later by local shopkeeper Margaret Hobson. Bent like a cotton stalk after frost. And the girl, Lord forgive me, she looked no older than 4. Journalistically, the claim sounds absurd, but the number of testimonies runs high. The entire town didn't hallucinate the same thing. And when you look across the surviving documents, sketches done by children at the time, crude charcoal outlines left in attic trunks, the images carry a recurring theme. Large eyes on a tiny bride, a stiff-backed man whose shadow looked older than his bones. The first move-in. When William and Agnes moved into 43 Galloway Road, they did what new couples do. Curtains in the windows, a rocking chair set on the porch, a hasty whitewashing of flaking boards. But neighbors swore the paintbrush was guided by small hands, though motions carried the steadiness of women who'd painted homes many times before. Children, ostensibly, ran through the yard. Yet the problem was their faces. Adults described little bodies with long stares, eyes that tracked people too knowingly. Local boy James Forum recalled 50 years later, "I played marbles with a lad there once. He couldn't have been more than 6, but when he leaned in, I swear, he smelled of pipe smoke and wore the kind of creased frown you see on my grandfather. He called me Song. He was 6 and he called me Song." Conflict of the church. Reverend Kirk fell into despair over the Ballantines. He'd married them, after all, and was now trapped between sacrament and suspicion. In his sermon notebooks, unpublished at the time, but found in 1974, there is a scrawled passage. "I fear I have bound together what should not be bound. Their children diminish even as they grow. Time falters in that house. Something unnatural nestles inside their blood." The Reverend claimed the family attended church once, arriving late, sitting silently in the last pew. The father's hands shook. Agnes scribbled notes furiously on a child's lesson pamphlet, though she had not yet learned to spell. The congregation avoided their eyes. They never came back a second time. Early medical interest. Doctors in Suffolk quickly grew curious. In particular, Dr. Elias Forum, a physician whose practice was small but respected, was twice summoned to the Ballantine home. He left both times pale and silent. Later, however, he wrote private messages to the New York Academy of Medicine, marked strictly confidential. One phrase in particular stands out. "The infants appear to regress rather than develop. Their first cries come from mouths lined in the folds of time. Reverse senescence, if such a thing can exist, appears embodied here." Yet his warnings, when reviewed, were dismissed as exaggerations. The county's medical board quietly filed them away. Officially, there was no such illness. The children appear. The census of 1916 lists the Ballantines with 3 children: Thomas, age 1, Grace, age 3, and Margaret, age 5. But those who claimed to see them disagreed. Each child's physical description stood at odds with its listed age. Thomas supposedly had tufts of grayish hair above his ears, a raspy cough, and the demeanor of a tired adult. Grace, at 3, asked complex theological questions of neighbors, too complex for any child. Yet her legs were short, her gait clumsy. Margaret appeared the most unsettling. Described as a stooped girl of 5, she spent afternoons studying chickens in the yard, as though she'd seen death before. The contradictions multiplied confusion. Were they aging backwards? Did they possess adult cognition encased within diminishing bodies? Or were neighbors exaggerating out of fear? The school incident, September 1917. The Ballantines attempted to enroll Margaret in the local schoolhouse. On day 1, she shuffled inside past the large oak doors, clutching a slate board under her arm. But when she answered roll call, several students screamed. One account describes her voice as that of a smoker in his 70s. Teacher Clarissa Mayburn remembered. She recited the alphabet perfectly. But backward, Z to A. I hadn't taught her that. None of us had. Margaret did not return to school thereafter. The Ballantines claimed she was learning in private. Neighbors claimed she frightened the whole class. Either way, children thereafter sang cruel playground rhymes about baby grannies and young old men on Galloway Road. A town's rumors turned darker. By 1918, rumors hardened into something uglier. War raged overseas, but inside Suffolk, gossip wars reigned. Mothers warned children never to play near the Ballantine house. Rumors brewed that the family practiced witchcraft, that a deal with the devil had been made, eternal youth, but in reverse, as punishment for seeking immortality. One story claims William was seen late at night digging at the edge of the property. When approached, he froze, child-sized shovel in his wrinkled hands. The watchers swore his face shifted younger in the moonlight. By the following week, a tiny mound arose in the garden, marked with a wooden cross no taller than a shoe. The photographer's visit. Only one man dared record the family. Henry Pritchard, a traveling portrait photographer, claimed he was invited to capture a wholesome family portrait of the Ballantines in 1919. But upon developing the glass plate, something disturbed him so deeply he smashed it immediately. He later described, "They stood in 3 generations, yet the smallest had a hollow gaze like my mother on her deathbed, and the tallest, a father by all accounts, looked halfway to a toddler's size. They leaned toward each other as though the picture were melting backward in time. I destroyed it so no one else had to look." No confirmed photograph remains. Only his testimony haunts history, alongside others too afraid to put brush or lens near the family again. An uneasy neighbor. One of the longest accounts comes from Bernadette Lowe, who lived across the road. In later interviews, Bernadette said, "You'd hear laughter from the porch, but not child laughter, hoarse, weary laughter. Their games weren't games either. I once saw the little boy sitting in the dirt arranging stones. He told me he was designing a coffin. When I told him off for morbid talk, he said, 'Don't worry, ma'am, it's my own.' He was barely a toddler, but I still think of the wrinkles round his eyes." Bernadette's testimony fed the growing fear. The Ballantines were no longer eccentric. They were unnatural, demonic, perhaps contagious. Shift toward secrecy. By the early 1920s, the Ballantines had cloistered themselves. Curtains drawn, gates locked, yard unkempt. Neighbors swore their hours seemed off, windows lit at 3 a.m, silence during afternoon sun. The family cart no longer brought children to public events, birthdays, holidays, baptisms. None was celebrated. Age, after all, meant only one direction for them, subtraction rather than addition. But if they sought seclusion, they failed. Every absence became more suspicious, every closed curtain more sinister. And when whispers grow, they gnaw at a community like rot in its structure. Stories drifted outward beyond Suffolk, picked up by stray journalists chasing oddities, and soon strangers began arriving, wanting to look for themselves. The first stranger. Documents mention a man named Albert Crane, an amateur folklorist from Brooklyn. In 1922, he supposedly visited the Ballantine home, gathering local tales for a personal book project. No one saw him leave. His body was never recovered. A year later, his family placed missing persons notices in Brooklyn papers. These notices were filed but never connected officially to Suffolk records. The Ballantines, confronted, denied involvement. Agnes, in her youth-softened childlike form, told Sheriff Hollis, "Sir, strangers' fates are not ours to weave." The sheriff left unsettled. Doubt festered. But again, no evidence, only hints of a larger tragedy. Theories of the period. Some in town rationalized through medicine. Perhaps the family had a form of dwarfism, or advanced progeria misunderstood. Others whispered of black magic, an inverted fountain of youth, punishing those who drank. More pragmatic farmers blamed inbreeding gone wrong. But those who lived near swore the truth was stranger. They claimed they saw time bend visibly. A candle burned in their window reversed itself after hours, wax climbing upward, a wick unblackening. A cracked cup on the porch slowly fused back together across a week. And always the family themselves seemed drawn tighter, smaller, younger, year after year. Closing of Part 1. Thus began the legend of the Ballantines, the family accused of living life backwards. No photographs, no medical journal ever published, only fragments, censuses that line up poorly, testimonies hand-inked into personal memoirs, and the raw memory of neighbors who swore they saw children crumble into elder faces and elders slip into infants. Suffolk would never escape its whispers. And soon tragedy put those whispers under a magnifying glass. The first Ballantine death. An event that horrified all who saw it, not because it looked like death, but because it looked like birth. Part 2, the first death is a birth. They say you can forgive a family for being strange. You can forgive rumors, silence, and shadows. But a funeral cannot be ignored, because funerals don't just happen in secret. They echo across church bells, across graves that mark a community's soil. And in August of 1917, the Ballantine family's echo became a scream. The announcement. The earliest account comes from neighbor Bernadette Lowe, whose testimony surfaced in an oral history project recorded in 1952. She remembered, "Agnes came to me weeping. She spoke like a widow, though her face was childlike, and she clutched a tiny handkerchief embroidered with the letter T. She told me her baby boy Thomas had passed. I dared to ask how. She only shook her head and said, 'He is smaller now, too small for the world to keep.' Thomas, according to census, was just over a year old. To outsiders, this would have seemed tragically unremarkable. Infant deaths were all too common in the early 1900s. But the witnesses who claimed to see him said he was no ordinary child. Some called him the old man in miniature, a bent-backed toddler with eyes sagging under heavy lids. Among locals, his death was not seen as the end of a baby's life, but the collapse of something unnatural. The funeral assembly. The Ballantine funeral was unlike any Suffolk had hosted. On August 17, townsfolk gathered reluctantly, drawn by morbid curiosity as much as piety. Reverend Kirk presided, but his recorded sermon notes tremble across the page. The child was lain before us, but it was no stillborn babe, nor lifeless shell. The body reversed. As each hour passed, features unaged, hands that shriveled unshrunk, hair of gray retracted black. By day's final prayer, the corpse was nearer to a fetus than a toddler. This was not a metaphor. Witnesses swore that during the funeral service itself, the body didn't remain still. It changed. Eyewitness accounts. There are 3 surviving written testimonies, each by unrelated townspeople. Clarissa Mayburn, teacher. When the small coffin was opened for viewing, I expected wrinkles. Instead, I saw the pale lips of a babe, newborn-like. Yet I remember, months earlier, that same child had spoken to my pupils with clarity beyond his years. I nearly retched. Life seemed to reel back like a film spool. It was a burial of a beginning, not an ending. Isaac Home, butcher. The thing on the cloth was not dead, like any death I've known. Its lungs still steamed faint, and the skin softened as though months were shedding off it in seconds. Someone in the pew behind me cried out, "Good Lord, it's alive again." But it wasn't alive. It was unalive, becoming less. Maria Vance, midwife. I have seen births, hundreds, but I've never seen a child undo itself. That day, I swore I nursed an infant, who now crawled back into the void. He was becoming nothing hour by hour, and when I closed the lid, I feared there would be nothing left come dawn. These testimonies, collected later, create one unified horror. Thomas Ballantine's death was his reversion into pre-existence. The town's panic. Word spread like a terrible contagion. Suffolk was small. By week's end, no door on Galloway Road was left unstirred by the scandal. Children were forbidden to play near the house. Some parents burned their children's hand-me-downs, fearing inverted sickness. Reverend Kirk begged the community to show restraint, but his parishioners whispered louder after each sermon. If death went backwards for the Ballantines, then what else in God's law might they be unraveling? Was eternal damnation their destiny, or eternal infancy? The coroner's record. Perhaps most chilling is the coroner's log, retrieved decades later in the Suffolk County archives, written by Dr. Elias Forum in official entry. Cause of death indeterminable. Body presented no signs of disease, organ failure, or trauma. Luminal inspection suggests biological regression. In plain terms, the child expired through subtraction of age. At hour 1, body resembled 12 months. At hour 6, corpus measured 5 months. By hour 11, infant form lacked definition, consistent with newly born. Material evidence inconclusive. Recommend further study. Several margin notes followed in red ink. No precedent in medical literature. Colleagues will reject paper. Keep sealed. And so sealed it was. The file sat untouched until rediscovered in 1974, nearly 60 years later. The coffin mystery. The burial itself was stranger still. The tiny pine coffin, purchased for Thomas, standard child measurements, was returned to the undertaker days later, nearly empty. Accounts claim the Ballantines requested a smaller container, suited for something swaddled, not grown. In effect, they buried not a child's body, but a fetus. Some murmured that by the time of interment, Thomas had shrunk to something closer to the size of a doll, skin translucent, limbs curled inward. Gravedigger Samuel Hodge swore he lowered no child that day. "I handled a seed," he said years later. "I laid seed to rest." Theological fallout. The congregation split over the meaning. One faction said it was proof of witchcraft and cursed blood. Another claimed it was a revelation, that death itself could be reversed, that mortality might be undone. When Reverend Kirk refused to declare the Ballantines blasphemous from the pulpit, nearly a quarter of his parishioners walked out. His church never regained its full numbers. Perhaps more remarkably, Reverend Kirk visited the family afterward. A diary excerpt preserved by his granddaughter reads, "Agnes clutched my hand. She begged me to baptize what was left. She spoke of her son's cries, not at his birth, but at his unbirth. He called for me, Father," she said. "He called for me as he grew smaller until his tongue was too tiny for sound. I refused to baptize that which was no longer human. My soul aches still." The Ballantines retreat. After Thomas's burial, the family's seclusion hardened like stone, windows shuttered, yard gone wild. No Ballantine returned to the market again. Deliveries were left on the porch, payments collected in muddy envelopes. The next two children, Grace and Margaret, were seen only fleetingly. Shadows through lace curtains, miniature figures tending to an overgrown garden. But Suffolk still saw, Suffolk still spoke, and Suffolk still feared. Rumors of contagion, fear of spread erupted. Farmers whispered that any who touched the coffin dirt might find their own families invert. Mothers crossed themselves when Ballantines walked by. Stories claimed cows miscarried after grazing near the property, that milk soured faster when purchased from shops patronized by Agnes. Science was absent. Superstition reigned, yet the family's own pattern seemed to fuel it. By 1920, both Grace and Margaret reportedly looked younger than ever before, so much younger, in fact, that some swore they should not yet exist at their listed ages. The secret autopsy. Here lies another disturbing record. Letters found in the effects of Dr. Elias Forum, decades later, indicate he attempted to secretly preserve tissue from Thomas during the funeral rites. These fragments, he wrote, disintegrated into earlier forms of matter, not decay, but literal unwinding. Samples first resembled liver tissue, then marrow, then embryonic gel, before vanishing altogether. His description borders impossible, but he insisted it occurred. "I have witnessed a death in reverse," he wrote. "The boy unmade himself beneath my scalpel. No stench of rot, no corruption, only subtraction, until nothingness remained. If God exists, he has inverted his hand here." The legend grows. By the 1920s, Suffolk became divided between those eager to forget and those unable to stop watching. Curious onlookers traveled from nearby towns, hoping for a glimpse through the fence. The Ballantine tragedy morphed into sideshow gossip. A carnival poster even circulated in Brooklyn, allegedly offering sight of the children who grow younger, though it's never been confirmed whether the Ballantines cooperated or were merely exploited as rumor. The phrase that recurred, etched into whispers, headlines, even in a faded chalk scrawl beneath the schoolhouse desk, was this: "First death is a birth," a saying that haunted Suffolk long after. The unanswered questions. Questions piled. If Thomas reached pre-existence, where did he go? Did the Ballantines watch their children vanish into nothing, over and over? What did it mean for Agnes and William themselves, whose own bodies seemed to slip gradually toward infancy? None would know yet, but none dared forget the sight of that tiny coffin. Closing of Part 2. One life was enough to confirm rumors were not rumors. The Ballantines lived in an inverted current. With Thomas reduced to a swaddled seed at burial, Suffolk's dread only mounted. The family was no longer merely peculiar. They were proof of something unholy or something revolutionary that bent the very laws of birth and death. But what truly seared them into history was the written record Thomas left behind before he reversed. A journal attributed to his mother, Agnes, reveals chilling thoughts that hint what she witnessed within her own home. Children unlearning speech, memories unraveling, and the terror that one day she herself would shrink into silence. And it is there that our story must turn next, toward the diary pages of a woman living her life backward, fearing every passing day was not a step toward wisdom, but toward non-existence. Part 3. The Journal of Agnes Ballantine. Introduction. A hidden manuscript. A house can lock its shutters, and a town can blind its eyes, but paper never keeps secrets, especially paper scrawled when no one is watching. In October 1929, demolition workers clearing out the attic of an abandoned schoolhouse stumbled on a cracked wooden trunk filled with rotted textbooks. Stuffed between them was a narrow booklet, weather-stained, its binding stitched clumsily with a kitchen twine. On its first page were the words, smudged but legible, "The record of myself, A. Ballantine." The discovery went practically unnoticed for decades, catalogued, shelved, and forgotten until resurfacing in the 1970s, when Suffolk University scholars began a project on regional folklore. By then, the Ballantines were long gone, but Agnes's voice returned, shaking, whispering. Every page carried fragility, part confessional, part diagnosis, part curse. Opening passage from the journal. My age at writing cannot be stated. Records say 24. My face speaks 7. My bones ache 80. Every year I live, I lessen. My husband shrinks with me. Our children vanish faster. The world notes anniversaries forward. Ours backlog like spilled ink, drying in reverse. Agnes set the cadence herself. This was no diary of quaint observations, but the testament of a woman disintegrating against her will. Her memories in reverse. She wrote often about memory, claiming her recollections were erasing themselves backward. I wake and forget yesterday first, then the week, then the month. The furthest thing behind me sticks longest, but even then it is slipping. My marriage by Reverend Kirk, I know it happened, but I feel it reducing itself, becoming only an engagement, then a meeting, then soon not even that. When shall I forget William's name and believe I never met him? This pattern created a chilling paradox. Memories weren't simply fading. They were unpiling themselves, like film reels running backwards through a projector. To read her words is to feel life itself retreating. The children in reverse. Most haunting are her descriptions of the children. Thomas has begun to nurse, though he once spoke. He forgets how to stand, then how to crawl. His words rewind to syllables, mother song in pieces. The younger ones follow. I dread the day they shrink small enough to fit entirely back into me. Shall I carry them again, swallow them like seeds, and undo the miracle itself? The image is sickening. Children unwinding into infancy before their mother's eyes, terror mingling with maternal sorrow. When she writes of Thomas, who by her hand passed smaller, we sense her dread of losing him, not once but twice, the house itself. She writes that the phenomenon didn't stop with bodies. Inside, objects change too. Plates mend after breaking. Milk unspills itself into pails. A candle thins but grows wax and wick again. Sometimes I see flies crawl backward from web to ceiling, wings folding against their own buzz. The house reverses small things as though mocking us. Time is not spoiled in here, it is rewound. Notice how these anecdotes echo the neighbor rumors in Part 1. Yet Agnes documents them with eerie detail. She was not only terrified, she observed. There's a scientific detachment hidden behind her agony. Anecdote: the receding wound. One of her longest passages describes accidentally cutting her palm while chopping onions. I gasped. The wound bled, yes, but then knit itself while I stared. The knife lifted back once, twice, until the skin closed seamless and my hand was clean. But in that instant, the onion slices became whole bulbs again upon the board. My supper unprepared. I starve when food remakes itself. A bizarre reality. Even acts of sustenance collapsed against entropy. Undoing cooking, undoing eating. A life condemned to hunger if one relied only on the house. Her fear of nothingness. A recurring motif in her writing is the fear of vanishing into nothing. Tomorrow I wake 6. Next season, 5. How many less until none? Shall I die unborn? What tomb keeps what was never born? Perhaps I vanish into some other womb. Perhaps I never was. This isn't just fear of death, it's fear of backward birth, fear of negation itself. Philosophically unnerving, intimately human at the same time. The clairvoyant entry. Some pages contain peculiar, almost prophetic notes. There will be others after us. They will wear our blood, but not our curse entire. Some will age forward, but crack between days. Science will look and whisper Benjamin Button, but it is not a tale. It is a tree with bitter fruit. We are only the roots. This reads uncanny. She seems to have anticipated future analogies, even Benjamin Button. This entry has been contested as interpolation by later archivists, but its presence makes her account eerily timeless. Her relationship with William. Agnes also documented her husband's regression. My William grows smaller. Each night he holds me, but his arm is shorter, lighter. I counsel myself I am widow, though his eyes still open. He says less. He nurses sometimes like babe. What is a wife to do when her husband suckles like her infant? There is horror here, not only in watching your children unravel, but in watching your spouse do it too, leaving you emotionally both widow and mother simultaneously. Evidence of mental strain. Toward the later entries, her language frays, words slant into childlike repetitions. Scholars speculate this reflects her own regression in literacy and cognition. Early entries carry sophisticated description, while later ones stumble into stunted voice. I am small, Agnes small, my papa no, William papa, my child little, empty, empty, empty. It is the written record of a mind unlearning language itself, proof not only of failing identity, but of rewinding existence. Scholars' interpretations. Modern interpretations vary. Some say the journal documents a rare neurological degenerative disease, where perception of time and memory distort. It could be hallucinatory, not literal. Others insist too many matching testimonies from witnesses give her credibility. The more sensational voices branded proof of supernatural phenomena. One thing is undeniable. No other document anywhere describes such intimate reverse chronology with that much consistency. The voice of Agnes Ballantine remains singular. The page, torn out. The final pages of the journal contain a ragged tear. At least 2 full sheets are missing. On the page before the rip, she scribbled only a sentence. It is inside the tree. What did she mean? Was she speaking literally of the elm trees on Galloway Road, or metaphorically of the family tree itself? We'll never know. But the missing pages invite speculation that someone removed them precisely because they were too revealing. The emotional punch. To read her journal straight through is to watch a soul evaporate. Articulate mother collapses to child. Wisdom unwinds to babble. Love reverses into need. She does not simply suffer time distorted, she becomes time distorted. Her words are her witness, and by the end, even those words revert to nonsense. And if a mother's journal wasn't enough, the scientific world soon sharpened its gaze. Whispers became notes, notes became reports, and a new kind of interest arrived. Not gossip, not God, but science. Men in coats carrying instruments, speaking the language of chromosomes and marrow. And with that interest came new horrors when the Ballantines were no longer merely watched, but measured. Part 4. Medical Intervention. Curiosity knocks in white coats. By the early 1920s, the Ballantines had become Suffolk's guarded nightmare. Neighbors prayed against them. The Reverend lost half a congregation. Agnes wrote her fears into fragile pages. But gossip doesn't stay idle forever. What had been rumor began creeping into medical corridors. And soon curiosity arrived not with pitchforks, but with stethoscopes. The first wave of intruders wasn't the mob, it was medicine. Dr. Forum and the unpublished letter. We mentioned earlier Dr. Elias Forum, the county physician who first reported Thomas's body shrinking at death. In 1923, deeply unsettled and unable to let it rest, he broke silence again. He wrote a desperate, unpublished letter to the Journal of the American Medical Association. His phrasing mixed awe and terror. If any curiosity for science remains, let it look not at the stars, but at Suffolk, where time itself unravels a family thread. The Ballantines demonstrate, through repeated observation, a physiology neither progressing nor degenerating, but retrograding. They are not elders becoming weak. They are adults unbecoming adults. We must decide if the laws of nature are elastic or if the devil himself is anatomist. The letter, predictably, was rejected. Colleagues call it hysteria, but fragments leaked through academic circles, and fragments breed fascination. Enter the outsider, Dr. Hildebrandt. By 1926, a new name appeared. Dr. Martin Hildebrandt, a German émigré physician trained in comparative pathology. Descriptions vary. Some call him brilliant, others opportunist. Regardless, he saw in the Ballantines both mystery and fame. Local records confirm he lodged in Suffolk that autumn, coinciding exactly with a spike in sightings of a stern gentleman carrying leather satchels, entering 43 Galloway Road. Some claimed he bribed his way inside, others that Agnes permitted him, believing science could save her family. His notes, pieced together decades later in untranslated German journals, are a harrowing mix of clinical fixation and quiet horror. The case notes of Hildebrandt. From his own handwriting, translated. Grace Ballantine, recorded age 5, physiologic presentation near 60. Pupils dilated, hair paling then darkening upon subsequent inspection. Regression noted across cognitive speech patterns in mere hours, full sentences fading overnight to half syllables. William, the father, revealed chest deformities resembling rickets, yet in intervals the curvature lessened. Photographs attempted, but plates corrupted. Images blurred, possibly light contamination, but I suspect interference beyond mechanics. The corruption of his photographic evidence mirrored Henry Pritchard's failed portrait years before. Whenever image met Ballantine, it distorted. Experiments. Blood that ran backward. Hildebrandt collected samples, hair, nail, and above all, blood. It's here his notes turn grotesque. Capillary withdrawal produced reversal. The globules separated, not coagulating, but reassembling into translucent plasma, proceeding backward toward a pre-cellular fluid, observed under lens, erythrocytes shrinking, nuclei reappearing, as if time retracts their division. One cannot exaggerate. The blood canceled itself. He described vials that, when left alone overnight, did not clot. They cleared, as though rewinding toward water. The limits of science. Modern scholars reviewing these reports point out that Hildebrandt's terminology only partially matches medical reality. Was this sloppy translation or his own distorted mind? Either way, his descriptions are consistent. The Ballantine biology didn't simply deteriorate. It unrevealed itself. This fits a chilling trend. In Agnes's journals, food uncooked itself. In Hildebrandt's reports, blood unformed itself. Both subjective and objective accounts pointed in one direction: regression as law. Mental regression studies. Perhaps most disturbing, Hildebrandt began psychological testing on Grace and Margaret. Accounts claim he gave shape blocks and puzzles, testing cognition. His reports: child displays university-level spatial reasoning, then within hours, reverts to errors of toddler. At midnight, she could recite psalms. By dawn, she asked, "Who is Father?" Her abilities are not declining, but disappearing in precise reverse. Each new day subtracts, leaving only competencies appropriate for younger years. Imagine the intimate humiliation. A child who could recite scripture and literature one day, babbling and baby talk the next. Knowledge unspooling like a loose thread. Community pushback. If Suffolk was afraid before seeing a foreign doctor, cart supplies to and from the Ballantine home only fueled panic. Rumors swirled. Vivisection, devil worship, even secret military contracts. Town meeting minutes from 1926 contain notes. Concern regarding strangers entering residence on Galloway Road. Citizens demand inquiry. Yet local sheriff authorities always hesitated. Fear froze them. If Hildebrandt was willing to step inside, better him than they. The ever-shrinking patriarch. During Hildebrandt's stay, William Ballantine reportedly shrank dramatically. Neighbors wrote that the once stooped elder became a boy of about 10, yet his hairline still receded. His speech still bore the rasp of adulthood. Agnes's journal corroborated. My husband now climbs into the child's bed. His boots no longer fit. He knows me half as wife or as mother. For Suffolk, this blurred line between marriage and infancy was abomination incarnate. The Ballantines were no longer a family. They were undoing into something unnatural, possibly obscene. References in popular mind. It was around this time that tales of backwards aging began spilling into popular imagination elsewhere. Newspapers overseas published strange human interest oddities, women growing younger, and boys born old. Decades later, popular culture would fictionalize this curiosity, most famously in the film The Curious Case of Benjamin Button. And today a viral YouTube video titled The Curious Case of Benjamin Button Disease circulates, earning millions of views. Though the syndrome, called progeria, accelerates aging forward rather than backwards, internet audiences instinctively link the condition to the myth of the Ballantine bloodline. CO history proves fascination with reversal is not dead. But the Ballantines were no story, no fiction. In Suffolk, their nightmare was witnessed and written. The unpublished thesis. Rumors claim Hildebrandt began drafting a thesis titled Retrogressive Vitality, the Ballantine Syndrome. Its fragment suggests he theorized a genetic palindrome sequence in their chromosomes, sections of DNA that read identically forward and backward. Perhaps tricking time inside cells. But the thesis was never defended. Hildebrandt vanished after 1927, as abruptly as he arrived. His boarding house bill was left unpaid. Some whisper the Ballantines consumed him, literally or temporally. Others claim he fled, terrified by what he saw. No one knows. Aftermath. Silence and shadows. What remained were his notes, half destroyed, half preserved in stray libraries across Europe. What remained in Suffolk was silence thicker than ever. The family withdrew so deeply that months passed with no sightings. And in that silence, something even darker brewed. The town's anger was no longer curbed by curiosity. Gossip hardened into action. Suffolk wanted the Ballantines gone. Closing of Part 4. So far, the Ballantines had endured whispers, funerals, and even scientific trespass. But communities rarely tolerate what they cannot explain and never forgive what they cannot control. The intervention of medicine satisfied no one. Instead, it exposed the family as even stranger, even less human than before. And when Suffolk had finally had enough, they turned rougher than scholars with scalpels. What came next was not observation. It was persecution. The town itself rising like a jury without trial, intent to cast out the family shrinking behind closed curtains. Part 5. The town turns against them. Fear finds a weapon. By the late 1920s, Suffolk was no longer simply whispering. Every field, every market stall, every Sunday sermon reeked of the family on Galloway Road. And fear, left unchecked, never rots quietly. Fear sharpens into action. Fear finds torches. The scientific intrusions of Dr. Hildebrandt hadn't solved anything. They'd only confirmed that the Ballantines weren't merely eccentric. They were something outside the human clock. And what people cannot explain, they condemn. So Suffolk began to condemn. Not through law, not through clergy, but through rough, neighborly wrath. The first vigil. In February 1928, a group of townsmen calling themselves the Circle of Decency held a night vigil near the Ballantine property. Officially, it was prayer. Unofficially, it was reconnaissance. Men posted themselves with lanterns, singing hymns off-key while peering toward shuttered windows. An account survives from Charles Merton, a milkman who joined the vigil. At first, we meant nothing wicked, merely knees bent to God. But the longer we stared at those windows, the less they looked like glass, more like eyes staring back. Someone began chanting against them, calling them thieves of time. By dawn, our prayer had turned to accusation. This was the seed of open hostility, the town beginning to reframe themselves not as uneasy witnesses, but as victims of the Ballantines' presence. Strange disappearances. Around this time, livestock began turning up missing or malformed. Farmers swore calves were born smaller than pregnancies allowed, sometimes so underdeveloped they were closer to fetuses than newborns. In one case, a cow allegedly delivered nothing but a lump of tissue that pulsed once, then unpulsed to nothing. Though there was no proof, farmers blamed the Ballantines instantly. Word spread, if they can undo their own children, what stops them undoing ours? The kidnapping of Grace. The line between accusation and violence broke one spring night. Grace Ballantine, at the time theoretically 9 years old, but reportedly appeared somewhere between 2 and an elderly woman, was abducted. Testimony decades later from local midwife Hester Shaw revealed, I heard the whistles down Galloway Road, men dragging something like burlap sack. But it was not sacks, it was her. Dragged by 3 boys, hardly more than 20 themselves. They hid her in the church cellar. Why? To prove something. To test whether she really unaged away. For 3 nights they watched in candlelight, recording changes crudely in Bible margins. And according to Shaw, they did witness it. Grace's body shifted, weakening, shrinking. By the 3rd night, she was incoherent. At that point, panic overtook cruelty. They fled, abandoning her back at her fence. The town did not punish the kidnappers. Instead, the story spread as evidence. They hadn't invented it. They had seen it firsthand. The witch accusations. By 1929, the Ballantines were being openly called witches. A broadsheet was circulated, hand scratches on cheap paper reading, "Beware the baby witches of Suffolk." Stories warped. That Agnes had made bargains in Europe before emigrating. That William was no husband, but a changeling. That time itself bent where they walked. Ironically, children were most vicious. Schoolhouse rhymes turned cruel. Backwards children, backwards kin, walk in small, walk out thin. Playground cruelty morphed into community evidence. The Ballantines' own youth shrinking became its own advertisement of damnation. Breaking of Reverend Kirk. The town's spiritual compass, Reverend Kirk, finally snapped under pressure. For years he had preached caution, refused to condemn outright. But after parish numbers dwindled after being hissed at as an ally to witches, he gave in. In July 1929, his sermon erupted into hatred. "The house on Galloway Road is Sodom's gate. Do not tarry there, do not pity there. Cast out what eats backwards, lest it pulls you into the pit with them." This was the last barrier gone. With the Reverend's voice joining rumor, the whole town finally felt vindicated. Persecution wasn't sin anymore. It was duty. Stone and glass. In August that year, the first open assault occurred. Rocks through windows, broken panes scattered across the Ballantine parlor. A note left on their stoop. "Leave before you unmake us." Instead of shrinking back, Agnes displayed an eerie kind of defiance. Witnesses saw her on the porch days later, sitting calmly, knitting garments small enough for newborns, though all her children were far older on record. Her calmness fanned the flames. Silence read as contempt. The town meeting, September 1929. Suffolk held an official town meeting. Notes in the county logbook explain, "Subject of Ballantine residents raised. Citizens expressed concern of contagion, moral disruption, and possible illegal experimentation. Proposals included forced relocation, house burning, or collective boycott to starve them out." Ultimately, no resolution passed, but the vote itself, written in neat clerk handwriting, was haunting. "Do we acknowledge the Ballantine family as human citizens?" The tally? 12 yes, 9 no, 27. Abstain. The community had literally debated their humanity. The betrayal within. At this time, even the Ballantines' few sympathizers began turning. Bernadette Lowe, the neighbor who once defended them, admitted in interviews later that she delivered secret notes to the sheriff detailing odd cries from the house. She confessed regret, but explained, "My husband feared if we shielded them, we'd regress too. I thought I was saving my own children by offering theirs." This betrayal exemplified the unraveling social fabric. No one was safe from suspicion. Friendships, loyalties, even compassion, reversed like everything else in their lives. The fire attempt, October 1930, saw the most dramatic act yet. Someone, never identified, poured kerosene against the outer beams of 43 Galloway Road. The fire caught but fizzled halfway, as though the wind itself reversed. Witnesses claimed flames bent inward, recoiling back into the soaked wood, leaving charred streaks that oddly reformed into green shoots of vine. For believers, this was proof the house itself was unnatural. Even fire unburns where they dwell. For skeptics, it was a botched arson. Either way, the Ballantines survived. Their escape tightened the town's hatred. Whispers of government. By 1931, larger eyes began noticing again. Not scientists this time, but agents. Suffolk residents occasionally spotted dark sedans parked miles from Galloway Road. Some suspected investigators seeking to harness the reverse condition. But the townspeople, steeped in their own paranoia, interpreted the sightings as surveillance of them, punishment for not ridding themselves of the Ballantines sooner. This outside presence did nothing to calm fear. Instead, Suffolk felt trapped, their community infected, both by backwards children and by forward-marching authority. The emotional weight. Imagine for a moment what it meant for the Ballantines themselves. Hunted inside their own home, pelted with stones, children stolen and returned, branded witches betrayed by allies, and yet each day their bodies shrank, their voices softened, their memories thinned. They were physically eroding while socially being crucified. Hunted from without, diminished from within, a family dissolving across two fronts. The signs were clear. Suffolk would not tolerate them much longer. The mob might fail with flame, but mania always finds a second weapon. What would become of the Ballantines when town wrath escalated beyond harassment? What when government interest collided with village vengeance? Those answers would come soon enough as a darker decade dawned. Because in the late 1930s, the Ballantines weren't merely hated. They began to disappear, one by one. And Suffolk learned what reverse life truly meant, not secondhand through rumor, not through journals or sermons, but through vanishing bodies shrunk into absence. Part 6. The Vanishing Generation. Shadows replace faces. By the mid-1930s, Suffolk seldom saw the Ballantines at all. And what glimpses existed weren't so much human as fractions of human. Half-bodies glimpsed at window glass, voices thinned to whispers, outlines smaller than their census ages allowed. They weren't regarded as eccentric neighbors any longer. They were fading figures. The community stopped throwing stones because there was soon nothing left to aim at. One by one, the family's children began to vanish. The disappearance of Margaret. The first widely documented disappearance was Margaret Ballantine. By paper records, she should have been 16 in 1932. Witnesses swore that by then she appeared 6 at most. One evening in June 1932, Bernadette Lowe reported hearing thin cries through her bedroom window, like an infant wailing from across the street. She looked out and saw Agnes pacing the yard, clutching a bundle so small it looked more like cloth swaddling than a person. The next morning, the cries stopped. Forever. When asked later, Agnes murmured only, "She's gone smaller than sight." Margaret's name remained on county rolls until 1936, then was quietly marked, "Deceased, unconfirmed." No body was buried. No grave exists. The child simply unaged into absence. Grace's collapse. The tragedy repeated years later. Grace, older than Margaret by record, should have been reaching adulthood by 1934. Instead, she was last seen clinging to the porch balustrade, body so undersized she could barely reach the lowest rung. Testimony from grocer Isaiah Dunn reads, "I delivered bread and laid it at the step. I swear on my soul," the little girl cried. "Thank you." Her lips moved, but no sound came. Her hands no bigger than sparrow wings. Agnes tried to hold her, but the child slipped inside her arms as though light itself was lifting her. Grace's disappearance was never explained. For Suffolk, the message was brutal. This wasn't random tragedy. This was erasure. The town terrors shift. Where Suffolk once blamed and raged, by mid-1930s, they shifted toward a new emotion, bone-cold dread. They realized the Ballantines might not require persecution after all. They seemed to be self-annihilating. Fearful townsfolk pulled away entirely, avoiding Galloway Road like a plague ground. Children dared each other to run past the house at night. Most ran 2 steps before screaming home. Mothers forbade even glimpses of the windows, whispering that if your eyes lingered too long, your reflection itself would shrink. The intervention of federal eyes. But while Suffolk shrank away, larger powers drew nearer. Unknown sedans idling at midnight weren't just rumor now. Preventative intelligence divisions, predecessors to modern agencies, began monitoring the case quietly. Records later declassified suggest Office of Strategic Services researchers studied anomalies in Suffolk as early as 1937. A declassified report fragment reads, OSS Field Memorandum, October 1937. Subject, Ballantine Family, Suffolk County, New York. Observation confirms regression phenomenon. Recommend containment before Axis powers exploit anomaly. Possible biotemporal weaponization. Initiatives underway. The tension of a world on the brink of war collided with the nightmare of a family unraveling. What Suffolk civilians called witchcraft, intelligence flagged as potential wartime science. William Ballantyne's vanishing. By 1938, William, the patriarch, had physically diminished into toddler stature. Formerly the stiff old groom who married Agnes, he now waddled about in little boots, gray eyes gleaming from a child's face. But he still muttered in a man's tone. One night in November, neighbors reported hearing laughter, thick, hoarse laughter, fading into sobbing. It came from William alone on the porch. The next morning he was gone. Agnes told a visiting reverend. My husband unstood. He returned to knees, then to cradle, then to none. He has left the world backwards. William's grave? None. His records? Terminated with no remains. The arrival of men in uniform. The Ballantines' misfortune drew sharper eyes. In 1939, uniformed representatives, allegedly Army biomedical officers, arrived at 43 Galloway Road. Suffolk citizens kept distance, but many watched. Trucks idled, wooden crates unloaded. No one knew what instruments arrived. Some whispered X-ray machines, others swore entire tanks marked containment fluid. For days, the windows glowed at odd hours, blue sparks arcing under blackout curtains. Then silence. The trucks left under cover of darkness, leaving townsfolk shaken. Whatever the government did, it neither halted disappearances nor produced answers for locals. If anything, it only deepened mystery. The case of infant Agnes. By 1940, Agnes herself had regressed so profoundly, townsfolk called her the mother-child. Census still listed her age at 45. In her final public sighting, she appeared no older than 4. Yet neighbors heard her whisper prayers through the night, prayers of a woman grown. An account from widow Dorothy Phelps describes her silhouette lit the curtain, tiny frame but head and hands, bent in grief. She called on God, on saints, on her own mother, but then her words failed. The next night, only babbling. The third night, silence. Agnes left no burial, no marker. Her presence retracted like candle smoke. Witness fear and myth-making. By this time, Galloway Road was abandoned after dusk. No child dared trick-or-treat there. No postman delivered mail. Adults spun contradictory rumors. Some claimed the Ballantines had been relocated under guard. Others swore they were buried alive in government labs beneath New York. Proverbs sprouted. Don't walk backwards on Galloway Road, lest you follow the Ballantines. War and the exploitation angle. What to erupted. Across Europe, Nazi research into human anomalies was well documented. American intelligence feared the Ballantine syndrome could be exploited similarly. Declassified files reveal a chilling proposal circa 1942. If regression can be triggered in hostile populations, Enemy combatants could be unaged into incapacitation. Pursue viability. The horror is staggering. Grieving children collapsed into non-existence, now eyed as potential weapons. The Ballantines, already victims of their own biology, became pawns in the imagination of warmakers. The rumored laboratory. A persistent local legend tells of one surviving Ballantine child, possibly a grandson, removed under force, transported to a secure biomedical wing in Massachusetts. No proof has surfaced, but fragments in OSS files mention a Case 12B, juvenile presenting signs of retrochronological regression. Some say that child was tested until he vanished, regressing to zygotic matter inside a jar. Others claim his tissue remains cryogenically preserved even today. The house abandoned. By 1943, 43 Galloway Road stood empty. Curtains shredded, vines swallowing the beams, porch sagging deeper than memory. For Suffolk, it was a relief, a tumor excised. But locals feared to enter. When developers attempted demolition in 1950, their equipment reportedly jammed, fuel draining in reverse into tanks. Work halted. The shell of the house lingered decades until storm collapse. Generation erased. By records, every Ballantine on Suffolk census was marked deceased between 1932 and 1943. Yet graves for nearly all were missing. Instead of funerals, there were disappearances. Instead of stone markers, only erasure. They didn't die in the conventional sense. They unexisted. Neighbors described the tragedy as children sucked back into heaven, though others simply called it obliteration, the silence left behind. The vanishing generation ended more as an absence than a climax. No final riot, no great fire, just family members shrinking one by one until nothing remained but rumor. The tragedy was too strange to mourn properly. It wasn't death you could weep at. It was eradication you could hardly comprehend. And yet files, whispers, and preserved notes indicated the story wasn't over completely. For even if Suffolk saw them vanish, scientists and agencies hinted that perhaps the Ballantines weren't erased, merely taken. Closing of Part 6. The backward family was gone from Suffolk soil. But their story did not stop there. From unfinished journals, vanishing graves, and sealed intelligence folders, a different mystery sprouted. Had the curse in fact passed onward? Hidden in genes, in palindromic strands of DNA, in descendants who unknowingly carried invisible cracks of reverse time. The vanishing generation was not an ending. It was the frightening silence before the revelation. Because decades later, fragments of hair, glass slides, and buried archives would resurface in sterile laboratories. And in those samples, scientists discovered that the Ballantine syndrome was not eradicated. It was sleeping, waiting. And perhaps it never truly left. Part 7. Genetic Secrets and Revelations. The Science Awakes. For almost 30 years after the Ballantines disappeared, little more than folklore remained. Their name lingered in Suffolk as a creepy bedtime story, a cautionary nursery rhyme. Walk backward, be backward, like the Ballantine kin. The fields overgrew, and the warped house collapsed into rot. But history has a way of leaving fragments, like fingerprints on glass. And in the late 1960s, medical researchers found themselves staring at the impossible. Hard samples tied to the family. What most believed lost to myth re-entered the laboratory. The church had passed judgment. The town had driven them out. But science finally cracked open the silence. The hair that wouldn't decay. The first breakthrough came in 1967 during a Suffolk museum inventory. A mislabeled archive box contained brittle envelopes. One held a lock of human hair, yellow-gray strands tied with faded string, labeled only Ballantine, 1926. The astonishing part, the hair had not deteriorated. Usually hair stored improperly powderizes with age. This lock hadn't. In fact, analyses soon showed some follicles looked more youthful than hair collected from modern donors. It was as though time itself had been rewound inside them. The discovery sparked immediate speculation. Could the family's backward aging persist in biomaterial even decades after disappearance? Enter Dr. Marta Esquivel. By 1971, the case attracted geneticist Dr. Marta Esquivel, a rising figure studying chromosomal abnormalities. Fascinated by phenomena like progeria and Werner syndrome, she believed illness could unlock secrets to longevity. When presented the Ballantine samples, Dr. Esquivel described feeling a pulse of dread. The strands did not conform. Under electron microscope, their keratin structure appeared arranged palindromically. Left to right, right to left, both readable. This is not found in normal biology. The hair was bitextual, as though genetics had mirrored itself endlessly. Her phrase, bitextual, entered obscure medical journals and disappeared under academic ridicule. But it marked the first modern term for what people began calling the Ballantine pattern. The palindrome chromosome. By 1974, new advances in karyotyping clarified the abnormality. Select chromosomes in Ballantine samples displayed inverted repeats, sequences like Kagikgasi, repeating perfectly both forward and backward. In the scientific world, such inverted repeats usually cause genetic disorders. But in the Ballantines, these palindromes seem to define their entire being. One researcher noted, "Where we track time forward through division and mutation, their DNA appears locked into a mirrored circuit. Instead of proceeding in one direction, it ricochets backwards. Their bodies are records set on endless rewind." The chilling implication. This wasn't a curse. It was code, written deep into their biology. The case of the preserved slide. Another shock came in 1979 when an abandoned storage drawer at Columbia University Medical School unearthed 2 glass pathology slides, both labeled vaguely Suffolk Anomaly, 1939. Historians pieced together their origin, linking them to military research mentioned in OSS files. The slides contained preserved tissue cross-sections. Decades later, they exhibited behavior no specimen should. Instead of degrading, the tissue appeared younger under re-examination than when first prepared. Archivists testified the slide images faintly shifted year by year, showing less cellular maturity. Imagine creeping to your microscope annually, only to find the cells de-aged since last look. Science fiction, but real. By the 1980s, whispers grew louder. Researchers privately dubbed it Life on Rewind. Official publications still scoffed. Editing backward DNA sequences resembled fantasy at the time. But within classified files, military and corporate labs considered horrifying possibilities. Could one induce regression selectively, peeling years away from an aging soldier? Or could enemies be undone into infancy within weeks? Could immortality be hacked by forcing DNA never to advance at all? Experiments were rumored, but never confirmed. For scholars reviewing now, it is impossible to tell whether prototypes were tested or whether the Ballantine material was too unstable to harness. Family tree reconstruction. In 1991, genealogical researchers retraced Suffolk parish records back into the 19th century, mapping the Ballantine lineage before they ever appeared infamous. They discovered the family surname in fragmented Irish immigration logs, a group that arrived in New York circa 1870. Oddly, several birth records in that line were listed, but lacked corresponding death records. Names like Elias Ballantine and Moira Ballantine simply ceased appearing, their existence swallowed halfways. Skeptics called it poor clerical work, but to pattern seekers, it smelled of generations quietly disappearing before Agnes ever put pen to journal. A terrifying probability. With genetic palindromes now known to exist in rare diseases, 21st century bioinformatics revisited the Ballantine samples with advanced sequencing. In 2005, unpublished computational run suggested a shocking outcome. The mutation was not extinct. Through cross-comparisons of publicly available genome banks, scientists noticed individuals in both Massachusetts and Ohio carrying truncated palindrome markers nearly identical to Ballantine samples. Not full syndrome, just dormant fragments. This suggested the unthinkable. Descendants walking today, carriers of reverse time code, living forward lives, but with risk of slippage. Modern testimony, the Boston child. Stories began to emerge. The most startling, a foster agency in Boston reported a peculiar case in 2012. A child, 6 years old, reportedly displayed unusual age mismatch. Cognitive tests suggested adolescence. Yet physically, he began reverting in growth charts. Foster parents described clothes growing looser every season instead of tighter. Medical staff dismissed it as misdiagnosis of developmental disorders, but rumors quickly surfaced online. A Boston boy who grows younger. For scholars of the Ballantine mystery, it struck like lightning. Ethical paradox and silence. So now the debate sharpened. Should such children, if proven real, be studied? Or hidden to save them from suffering the fate of Agnes's brood? Ethicists argue aggressively. Some see salvation, unlocking youth, understanding time. Others see tragedy, forcing children to fade as torture, not science. And in the archives, tucked away under dusty signatures, sit DNA sequences extracted from that old Suffolk hairlock. Reanalyzed recently, they bear unmistakable code, not fiction, not folklore, data. The Ballantines were real, and their mark persists. Implication for all of us. The revelation flips the story on its head. For a century, people thought a cursed bloodline had died out. But science now whispers otherwise. They didn't die, they scattered. Which means anyone could carry backward echoes unknowingly. That quiet fear fuels modern curiosity on forums, in documentaries, and yes, in viral clips comparing Ballantine syndrome to the concept known from fiction. People search it daily, stumbling into the rabbit hole. Could I unravel backwards too? Could my child? Final passage into Part 8. The Ballantines began as whispers in Suffolk, ended as vanishings, and persist today as code in chromosomes. Their story morphs yet again, from livestock blame and midnight vigils to blood vials and genetic maps on glowing lab screens. The horror is no longer ghostly. It is clinical, quantifiable, and possibly transmitted silently through family trees. And if you think that's safe, think again. Because what happens when a dormant code wakes? What if a child tomorrow wakes up smaller than yesterday, murmurs wiser than their years, then vanishes into nothing? That is the modern echo, the unfinished curse. And as we arrive at the present day, Part 8 will take us to the terrifying edge. Real eyewitness whispers of inverted children now, and the possibility that the Ballantines are not history, but future. Part 8. The present echo. Whispers in a modern age. For nearly a century, the Ballantines lingered in Suffolk's shadows, erased yet whispered by their neighbors, chased by scientists, half explained by military files. By the 21st century, they should have been only history. a closed case, a local ghost story fading into folklore. But silence can only last so long. In the hum of modern media, haunting takes new forms. Strange children appearing in clinics, family archives revealing irregular DNA, messages tucked into online forums describing conditions doctors cannot classify. The Ballantines are gone from Galloway Road, but their echo may be much closer than anyone dared imagine. The Connecticut Report. Our first echo appeared in 2003 in a children's hospital in Hartford, Connecticut. Doctors presented a confidential case, a girl aging inconsistently, regressing physically every quarter year. She entered at age 7 with proportional growth for her age. Within 18 months, she measured only the size of a 4-year-old, while her speech retained advanced fluency. One physician privately wrote, "We are observing a reversal of growth velocity unmatched in pediatrics. Records suggest not stunting but retroaggressing, a literal inversion. Familial DNA studies inconclusive. Possible connection to rare palindrome sequences?" The note wasn't published. Too absurd. The family abruptly relocated. The girl vanished from follow-ups. No obituary, no trace. Message boards and theories. By the 2010s, new whispers surfaced online. Parents posting anonymously on medical forums described sons or daughters getting smaller. A mother in Oregon mentioned an 11-year-old whose baby teeth reappeared. Another in Spain claimed her child began losing height at puberty instead of gaining. Dismissed publicly as exaggerations, these posts nonetheless found each other, forming threads of uncanny similarity. Old Suffolk researchers cross-checked the descriptions against Agnes Ballantine's journal. The parallel was chilling. One phrase appeared multiple times, unknowingly echoing Agnes. "My child is less each day." The Boston boy revisited. We return to the Boston foster child whispered in Part 7. Deeper investigation unearthed anonymized medical files leaked in 2015. They describe a boy cognitively tested at age 6, IQ aligning more with a teenager's, height and weight receding by measurable percentages every 6 months, bones regressing in mineral density appearing younger on scans. Case notes abruptly stopped on June 12th. Final physician annotation reading only. Subject removed by state custody transfer. Destination undisclosed. Today, no one in Boston's foster system will comment on the boy. The file may as well have been inverted into disappearance. The cultural fascination. Meanwhile, the internet provided a new stage. Viral videos on YouTube began linking Benjamin Button disease, a nickname for Hutchinson-Gilford progeria, to the old myth of backward families. Millions clicked titles like "The Curious Case of Benjamin Button Disease." And every comment section seemed to contain at least one voice whispering, "I knew someone like this. A cousin. A neighbor. They got smaller over the years." It's impossible to verify these claims, but folklore thrives on electronic echo chambers, turning private anomalies into public fascination. The Ballantines once died by silence. Now they live by speculation. DNA databanks and hidden carriers. Here's where science takes the lead again. Genome databanks worldwide meant to study family history and ancestry occasionally return anomalies. Analysts scanning in 2020 flagged clusters of palindrome DNA, once considered empty curiosities in New England populations. The eerie discovery? Several matched nearly identically to the Ballantine hair sample archived since 1926. The implication is massive. Although the visible syndrome annihilated its hosts in Suffolk, dormant carriers may remain, living normal lives, raising families, never knowing which child might silently trigger the reverse switch. The paradox of inversion. immortality or erasure. Modern biologists argue about what the Ballantine legacy would mean if reawakened. Some argue it hints at a key to longevity. If reverse coding can be interrupted midway, perhaps aging itself can be slowed. Others emphasize erasure. There is no middle ground. Regression accelerates until nothingness remains. It is both a promise and a death sentence. As one researcher put it, the Ballantine phenotype is immortality miswired. Instead of eternal youth, it collapses youth into unborn void. Unsettling sightings. And yet, outside of labs, stories multiply. In Ontario, a family whispered of a daughter truncating in age from 10 to 8, silently withdrawn from school, never reappearing. In France, a nun wrote a private letter describing an infant with a tongue quoting scripture. She sealed it within convent archives. In Kentucky, an ER nurse insisted she treated an 8-year-old boy with skeletal x-rays resembling those of a newborn infant, though he could write full sentences. Within weeks, she was ordered not to speak of it again. No proof too fragmented to cite as science, and yet unmistakably parallel to what Agnes herself once penned in 1929. The fear among carriers. For those who trace genealogy back to Suffolk, unease lingers. Some families actively scrub Ballantine branches from ancestry trees. Others embrace their possible connection, calling themselves inverts online, running forums that discuss dreams of regression, bodies moving backward, memories playing in reverse at night. Are all these claims true? Many surely are fantasy, but fantasy feeds the very possibility that truth hides among them. Science crosses ethics. In 2021, a biotech research group in California reportedly attempted to replicate palindrome coding in mice to observe temporal instability. Humane protocols flagged irregular results. One cage appeared to undevelop, pups shrinking until their spines curled into indistinct tissue. The experiment halted and records sealed. But whistleblowers leaked notes. The summary: we touched the mirror and the mirror touched back. Proof that playing with Ballantine code is both irresistible and catastrophic. Our tomorrow. So here we stand, in a present where Suffolk whispers echo online. DNA databanks prove anomalies persist. Doctors witness children slipping backward. Corporations hide failed mimicry attempts. Which means the Ballantines never truly died. Their syndrome is not history, it is legacy. Maybe in 10 years, a child in your neighborhood will look 6 but talk like 60. Maybe in 20, DNA tests flag palindrome markers in your family. Maybe tomorrow somewhere, another coffin will be dug for a child who died younger than they were born. The Ballantines began as a family. They ended as a warning. They were abandoned, investigated, persecuted, erased, and yet blood and memory flow stubbornly forward even when their own bodies rebelled backward. If their story stopped in Suffolk, it would be folklore. But the echoes today remind us. The strangest histories don't lie still. The family that lived in reverse may be gone, but their riddle isn't solved, and their shadow falls across all of us.